Welcome, everybody. We are going to be working on the remainder of building that Bouncy Ball app today. So we're going to finish that off. We didn't get to quite finish it last week. So this will be part two of that and kind of the culmination. And from there, we're going to start moving into unit 4. But we are here finishing up unit 3 today, building the Bouncy Ball app, which is the end. I did also add the assignment here at the very bottom of the unit so you guys can submit it when you're all complete. I am working out of the instructor's manual, and I do that for a number of different reasons because it has a lot of extra notes. And real frankly, Apple does not obscure this from you. So it would probably be wiser for you guys to actually use the instructor version because of all the auxiliary information that's provided in it. And it helps to, I think, plug a lot of knowledge gaps that maybe is missing from the regular version of the book. If you recall, if you look back a page or two here, and I'm just going to scroll backwards, we were the last couple of things that we did in the app is we took that barrier and we tilted it a little bit. That's a 10-degree tilt, I believe, or 10%. I'm not really sure what that number actually, I assume that's an angle. So it's probably 10 degrees. I'm not really sure. And then we also added ball bounciness. And then allowed basically the app to do a callback, but then to control it. And I think we all got it to work correctly last time before we adjourned, right? So that was actually a really big step. So we're going to be picking up here then on part 8 of the app build. So in the instructor's manual, we're on page 423 if you're following along. And I'm going to be using this as my guide. Sometimes I'll pull it on screen and sometimes I won't. For right now, I'm going to pull it off over onto screen number 2 here just to be a little more efficient. And in terms of the tools you need up and running, I do have Xcode up and running, and I did the opening up of the last project. This is the last thing I worked on, so it was right at the top of the little box that pops up. So I just clicked on it, it opened up, put me right back where I was. And what I did recommend to you guys before I hit the record button is once you get your tools up on screen, even though we haven't changed any of the code yet, it's not a bad idea to actually launch this and run it and get it up on the screen just to kind of do like a clean build. It's not really a clean build at this point, but a priming build so that the tools are all primed up and ready to go, right? So in other words, the simulator is active in the background. I'm also going to try to see if I can do this in a way where we can look at that simulator real clearly as we're working, because I think that's really helpful when you're doing GUI builds. All right, so here's the app up on the screen. If you remember, we set it up so that you click the funnel, the ball drops, it bounces and hits the little diamond. And there's things in here that we disabled from being draggable. The barrier is one thing that we can still drag. The diamond is not. I don't think we can move this anymore, but we can redrop the ball, right? But this time the ball fell all the way through. Well, whatever. We still have issues with the app. That's not the point. We just want to run it, make sure that code is built in the background, and we're kind of ready to roll. So I'm going to leave that up on screen there, and then we'll load it up as we kind of go here. All right. So in part 8, the title of this section is called Creating a Complex Challenge. Yeah. If you're struggling with the echoes on that, the recommendation is only activate the mic on one and only activate the speakers on one of the devices, not on both, right? Headphones help too, but not too bad, right? It wasn't like, and the answer to the test is, and then you're covering it. No, we're good. We recorded that in. That will be eternalized forever on the internet, by the way. All right, so let's get rolling here on what they're saying. So I'm just going to read verbatim from the book to get started here, just so we know where we're kind of going with this. And it says, for more interesting gameplay, you should include multiple barriers and targets, right? So right now we have one barrier and one target, kind of boring. And so one thing that we could do is we could add variables such as barrier 1, 2, 3, whatever, and then target like 1, 2, 3, for example. Um, but there's some challenges to that. So like if you were to add variables for each one of those things and you try to manage each one individually, so in other words, what the book is calling manage them in parallel, it's not very practical, they're saying, or flexible. So they're saying the better solution is to generalize your code by maintaining an array of barriers and an array of targets, right? Because they're related objects. So it makes sense to collect them together into an array. And then it's easier than when you're like looking to change things or add more targets or adjust them. And putting stuff into an array makes it easier to basically expand on the game and refactor when you need to. So the goal basically that we have here is to restructure our code without changing the functionality of the game. And so we're going to do a little bit more refactoring is where we're going next. So this is refactoring round 2 if you're looking at the titles in the book. So first, what we would like to do is to basically set up an array to hold a number of barriers as opposed to one. So at the very top of the file, we're going to come all the way up here. We are going to set up a variable called barriers. And you do see that we have a ball up here. All right, I'm going to leave that where it is. I'm going to actually go below it. And the reason I'm doing that is, you know what? I have all this barrier stuff here. So let's put the barrier stuff next to it. So I'm put it right above. And they do want us to make this a variable because contents will change. And I'm going to call it barriers, plural. Be mindful of that. And then here we're basically sort of declaring a type. And I want you to watch what I do here is I am going to use square brackets, and inside those square brackets, I'm going to put in the type of shape, which is a type that we can pull in. So like, for example, a polygon shape, for example, could go in there. So in other words, this is going to be an array that holds shapes. And then we're creating an empty instance of it at this point in time. So here we're declaring what we're putting into the array. The fact that it's an array is really kind of declared by the fact that there's square brackets here. And then we're initializing it to start with to be empty, right? All right, so it says next here in the book, it goes, you already have a function that adds a barrier to the scene, right? And if you want to revisit that, you can look at that in the code here, right? So there's that function, right? That sets up the barrier in the scene. But what the book is saying is it's not general enough to handle all the barriers. This is designed for one particular barrier as opposed to any barrier that we might create. So, right. So if we make a couple of adjustments, it'll play nicely with the new array and give you a lot of flexibility to put barriers wherever you want. And that sounds a lot cooler. And if you remember the initial dry run of the program with where it had multiple barriers, I don't know if you guys even recall that at this point, but that's kind of how they got to that point, is by basically doing what we're about to do next. So it says first rename the function from setup barrier to add barrier. So let's rename this. So I'm just going to call it add barrier as opposed to setup. Now this will trigger some errors in your code, so don't freak out to that. Right, that's going to happen because we're making calls to it, and now it's no longer there. Right. All right. Now, the other aspect about this, so I just went ahead and I just changed this manually, right? But if I decided that, if I have a function call to this and now I'm changing that, maybe the other way to do this is I could do that edit all in scope thing, if you guys remember. So let's kind of come up here and find that again and see if we can highlight it. And it's not giving me that option again. I don't remember how we triggered it last time. Okay, so there we go. Edit all in scope, right? And we just want to change this to add barrier. And I think that's probably the preferred way that Apple would like us to do this. Now that should fix, once I press enter here, not only fix the name here, but hopefully it fixed it down here too, and it did. Right, so that's kind of the grand goal though. So that editor, edit all in scope command. So editor, edit all in scope. Changed it at every spot where we called it. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add parameters to the function so that we can then send it information to make the barriers that we're adding unique. So that we can specify, for example, the things that we're hard coding in here, like the position, the width, the height, position, and the angle are all things that we would be able to, or should be able to feed in dynamically, and therefore control the app a little bit more specifically. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to adjust that function to do a couple of things. Now, if you're looking in the book, and I'm just going to pull the book over here for a second. All right, so this is the code we're about to add in, by the way. And if you take a really good look at this, they have this like keyword thing in front of it, file private. Now, I'm going to say that functionally, we don't necessarily need to have that in there, but it doesn't hurt anything either. So you can, what I'm telling you is basically you can make it optional. Since we already have it called a func and we don't have the file private thing in front of it, I'm going to leave it as is. Okay, I'm just letting you guys know that. But if you're wondering, if you're looking at the book, you know, that's a concern. So in other words, the book has here file private. And for those of you that understand object-oriented, you know, class level programming, this basically makes it so that this is only accessible from inside this file. If we remove that, it's accessible from outside, and I'm just going to like make this argument, it's like there's no other programs that are going to be accessible, so it doesn't really matter. You know, is the grand point. Now, in between here, we're going to add a bunch of parameters. So we're going to just type as follows. So first we're going to say at position, colon, and then we're going to feed in a point. Then we're going to do a comma, and then we're going to just throw in the width, which is a double, the height, also a double, and then the angle, also a double, right? So the position has an alias basically for its name that we're going to use internally here. But the rest, the width, the height, and the angle, those are going to be fed in as well. So in other words, the stuff that we're normally kind of feeding in, we're going to control externally. Then inside here, we're going to be changing our stuff, so some of our stuff, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the comment in place, and then I'm just going to retype here, and I'm going to put in a let command, say let barrier points equal, and then inside of square brackets, and see I typed curly, square brackets, and I'm going to expand those because I'm going to add a whole bunch of stuff. And we're going to take all the barrier points that we were, you know, for example, you know, kind of putting up here, you know, so like all these barrier points and kind of this format, and we're going to build that right into the structure so that when we feed the data in, it will create that for us. All right, so let's kind of do this. This is a methodical process. So we're going to say point with parentheses, and we are going to be using XY all the way through this. So we are going to put in a 0, 0 for the first one. And then the second point, also XY, is going to be 0, and the height that we feed in. Excuse me. Then the next point, you remember these are all the points all the data points we need to declare a polygon shape in essence. So here we're going to put in width. Oops, got to spell it right though. Width.
Oh, that's
Of course, I spell it wrong. And height. And this is the same pattern we were following before, you know, and basically the explanation is the same on all of it too. Final point, once again, XY. And then here we're going to put in width and 0 for Y. So that's going to feed everything in. Then down below here, we're going to put in a let statement. So we're going to say let barrier equal. And so this is where the points are being set. And this is where we're actually going to create the shape in this next step. We're going to say polygon shape. And of course, I totally misspell it. Right? Polygon shape. And then what are we feeding in? The points. What points? Well, we need an array. You notice how it's like picking up the fact that we need an array here. And we already have one created. So we're just going to call in the array that we have called barrier points, just like that. All right, so that's just pulling it right from above. Then the command will be barrier dot append, which adds it to the scene, right? Spell it right. And then what are we feeding in? The individual barrier that we created, right? So the individual polygon shape. So think about how this is going to operate here. Basically, we're going to feed in this information, the point position, the width and the height, and the angle. This is going to create the polygon shape and then append the barrier to the scene that we're working on currently. All right. So then the other thing is that we aren't going to necessarily change the code that's down below here, right? We're just simply going to be kind of tweaking it a little bit, I think. So we're leaving that other stuff in place, like, you know, what the color is, does it have physics, is it immobile, all that stuff is important. There's a couple that we need to modify though, so think about this because they're unique to the first barrier that we put in. The first one is its position. So instead of declaring the position, we're just going to use the position that we're feeding in. So barrier dot position just becomes position. That just makes it generic. Same thing happens with the angle. We're just going to use the angle. So that's fed in to here externally. So position and angle are fed in externally. All the rest of the stuff stays just the way it is. Now, the other thing that we want to be really careful about, so we've made the change now to the function. And I am getting an error here, so I'm wondering a little bit why I'm getting the error. Did I misspell something? Oh, yeah, right here. So this should be barriers.append, not barrier.append. And I don't know if you guys were getting the same error.
Oh.
That, okay, so that took the error away.
I was, yeah.
Yeah. One letter, all it takes, right? So this is our rewritten add barrier function, right? It's refactored, it's rewritten. Now it's made generic. It accepts a bunch of parameters. Angle and position are fed in externally, right? So we're not going to hard code those here. All right. So the next instruction says now you can delete the declarations for barrier width, height, and barrier points and barrier from the very top of the file. And notice how we didn't do that before. We're doing it after. So barrier width, height, barrier points, and barrier all are going to go away because now we're handling all of this inside the function, right? So you could also comment it out, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete those. All right. So instead of all that, we have an array that holds it. Whenever we call the function will accept the, where the starting point is, the width, the height, and the angle, create the object, create the shape, and then allows us basically to create a bunch of these barriers. This is really kind of the neat thing. Right. All right. So now they're also pointing out, hey, we just changed a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't know if you guys are catching this over here, right? On the right-hand side, you see all these red marks, which means we have problems, right? So let's scroll down to the problems, and they give you a really wise tip in the book. And the book is basically saying, once you see errors like this, you start at the top and work your way down, not from the bottom up ever, right? Because sometimes what happens when you have errors in code is the top one generates all the bottom ones, and then you go fix the bottom one, and then everything's broken. So you always go top down, find your first mistake and then work from there. All right, so it says you'll see a few compiler errors crop up after you made all the changes. Tackle them in order from top to bottom. The first error in setup, and I'm looking to see, okay, so they're reading down here. All right, so here they're seeing this is the first error. I think that's kind of interesting, because what they're saying is we're calling this function, but that function now was rewritten to accept all these parameters, right? So we have it already set up to feed in a bunch of points, and now we're not sending them. So of course it is breaking. So here's what's happening. Function setup runs the whole program, and one by one, it sets up the ball, it adds the barrier. This is missing parameters, right? And then we have these other things, where we're calling on the barrier, but the barrier is incorrect. So this is generating these two errors. So it's not necessarily top down, but it's top down relative to this function. That's kind of the point. So now we need to feed in points. And so let's feed them in the way that they expect. So here's an example. All right, so I'm just going to feed in the points they're suggesting. So they're saying at point, and then once again, we're going XY here. So I'm just going to scroll down to XY, and I'm going to type in the same numbers we used before, by the way. So 200 and 150. So that's our X and Y points. After that, we're going to put in a comma because we need the next piece of information, which is the width. And that requires, well, let's put in 80. And then we'll do a height. And they're suggesting 25. And then we'll also add in an angle, which is going to be 0.1. Right. And if you recall, those are all the same settings we used before. So we're calling the function, we're feeding it in data points. This will create a barrier. Right. All right. So it says the next two errors, where it says cannot find barrier in scope. So those are the ones we see above. They're caused by the fact that we deleted barrier as a constant way up at the top. And so basically in both of those functions, we have to now go through the array of barriers rather than the current barrier itself. All right, hopefully that makes sense. All right. So let's go to drop ball.
Before we go further, I do have an error on that one.
Okay.
That we just did.
Okay, and what does the error look like, Jomar? You want me to pause here for a second and take a look?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, let me just pause for a moment. All right. Yep, spelling things correctly helps a lot, right? Which I proved a few times already today. All right, so we're gonna basically take the two functions that you see on the screen here that are getting flagged with errors, and we're gonna tweak them to basically help them out a little bit. So drop ball Okay, takes the ball position, puts it in the funnel position, right? That's not going to change. We don't want it to drop right away, so we stop all motion. But now this is inaccurate, right? Because it dealt with a singular barrier. We still want that command. We don't want them to be draggable. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a loop that's going to go through the array of barriers, making them all not draggable, or is draggable false, if you want to look at it that way. So the loop would look like this. For barrier in barriers, and this is one of the reasons why, singular, plural, why we do that. Here's our loop. And then we're going to just basically take this code and put it inside there. So I'm going to cut it and paste it in. And so what it's going to do is it's just going to loop through the array of barriers and add this property to all of them. It's pretty simple, right? Not that difficult. All right. Same thing is going to happen here. Once it's exited the scene, we need to do the same thing. So same exact syntax for barrier in barriers. There's the curlies. And then is draggable. In this case, yes, true. So you can move, in other words, you can move the barriers after the ball has dropped off the scene. So the thinking is you drop the ball, it didn't bounce where you wanted, then you move your barriers around until they bounce where you do want them. That's what we're doing. And because we're adding more than one barrier, you might have to, like, depending on where your targets are, move those barriers all around the screen to get the right bounce pattern, right, to make it fall through correctly. So making it, actually significantly more challenging game-wise. All right. So let's do this at this point because we made a lot of changes to the code. Let's make sure it still runs. I can see, from just a little like preview area here, I don't have any errors currently being flagged, so it should be okay. So I'm going to hit the run button. Let's run it. Give it a chance to build and propagate. Okay, so there's my barrier. And yeah, you notice how this barrier is a lot smaller. Well, that's what they told us to put in, by the way. And by the way, I don't know if you caught this or not, but we didn't necessarily get told to add a bunch of barriers yet, right? We're still working with one, but the point is it's bouncing, and then we can move the barrier, bounce again, right? I can't move it when the ball's dropping. And then you can just kind of play with that a little bit, right? Still some issues with this, but the fact is we can move the barriers around for better or for worse. Sort of control things, right? But you see kind of the general aspect of it here. Right, let's go ahead and stop the app from running. Now, the other aspect of this is they are going to have us create multiple targets, right? So, and they did talk here really quickly about the fact that we will create multiple barriers, and I'm not sure at what point they exactly want us to do it, but they certainly didn't provide the code. But I just want you to think about this conceptually. If you are going to add multiple barriers, you just basically take this command and just give it a new set of points. So I'm just going to, for example, create one, even though the book is not telling us to do this yet. So we're going to add a barrier. We're going to choose a point with XY. I'm going to come up with some numbers here. I'm not really sure what they are yet. So I'm going to do like 300, or maybe that's too much. Maybe like 100X and 80Y. It's going to be maybe not quite as wide as that one, but it is going to be the same height. Okay. The next thing is it needs angle. That one's 0.1. Maybe I can do negative 0.1 on the other, so it angles the other way, if you guys are catching me. So just to prove that that works, let's just run it. So here comes the thing. Now you see two barriers, right? May or may not be what you want. I'm just saying. It sure misses the second one. but here, I can change it. Interesting, right? And yeah, I can change those. And so for example, and I know they're going to coach us on doing this later, but let's see if we can get some interesting effects here. Yeah. So you can play with that, but there's proof that it works, and you can add as many barriers as you want at this point. Once again, I'm going to stop the app from running. Okay. So let's move on to the next part, which is getting those multiple targets. All right. So it says creating multiple targets is kind of an analogous process. So in other words, it's similar to what we just did. And we're going to follow kind of the same procedure. We're just going to apply it all to targets now instead of to barriers. All right, so this will be kind of repetitive. So going all the way back up to the top. And basically what we're ultimately doing is we're going to replace this with something that looks like that, So I'm going to do that kind of in the same spot here, just in close proximity to where we originally did it. So I'm going to first set up a variable called targets, plural, which is going to be an array of shapes. And we're going to make that empty to start with. So just empty square brackets. Now, the way that we did the setup target, or the way we did setup barrier, we're going to do the same thing to set up target. So we're going to edit this in scope. So I'm going to come up to the editor, edit all in scope, right? And we're going to change its name now to add. So it will update the function name here, and then we'll update all the function calls as well, right? So way down here at the bottom, wherever we're setting up a target, now we're adding a target, right? That's refactoring the name. You guys good with that?
Sure. Yeah.
We'll call that a yes. All right. All right. So now that we have the add target function rename refactored, now we're going to do the same thing we did before, which is to feed in information. And basically, we're going to create more than one target at different positions. It's kind of boring to just have one target to try to hit. Wouldn't it be cooler if we had a bunch of little diamonds on the screen to try to hit? We just need their position. So once again, we're going to say at position. Just like that. So that's the only piece of information that we're going to send in. And remember, a point is XY. At the very top here, kind of like we did with the barrier thing, we are going to set up a constant to receive the target points. So right here, we're going to create a little blank space. And I'm totally fumbling with my arrow keys here. Sorry about that. And we're going to say let target points equal, and here comes square brackets again, and I'm splitting them. And we're going to follow the same technique we did before. And we're going to put in a whole bunch of different points. Now, here's the conceptual difference. When we were doing the barriers are rectangles, which have a height and a width, a position of XY, and an angle. They have like 4 properties that we're dealing with to put them on the screen. The target point, though, if you kind of look at this, the only thing that determines its place on the screen is basically the numbers that we've typed in here. So I'm actually going to create a bunch of targets all at once in an array. And I'm going to create 4 to begin with. And I'm just following exactly what's in the book. So we'll use like their example. So we're going to create a point. All of these will be XY again. And the first one is at 10, 0. And then a comma after. And then we're just going to do a series of these. So point XY. Next one is 0, 10, oops, 0, 10, comma, once again, a point, XY. This one's at 10, 20, another comma, and then a point here, XY, and then we'll go to 20, 10. I'm just using these numbers because this is what's in the book, right? Not whether or not I like them. Now, I know from like the ones that I had before, right? Well, I wanted them lower on the screen, but who's to say where they should be? We can always come in and tweak these numbers and put stuff wherever, by the way, right? Now, once we have that array of target points created, let's create another variable here just called target. And what we're going to do here is, once again, the polygon shape points is expecting an array, and you see it from the square brackets. What are we feeding in? Well, the array that we created up above. That's what we're feeding in. Same thing we did with the barriers. Now that we have those like basically defined, and look here, this is the plural version of targets, right? We're going to append those to the scene. And what are we appending? One of those target shapes. This is added code. Well, the book has them all separated like this. You don't have to separate them out, put lines in between. I do think it's easier to read though. All right, once again, we have some existing code. And from your experience with the, like changing the barriers, you've already figured out that the position no longer is going to be hard coded here, but rather going to be fed in dynamically. So the target position will equal whatever the position is of the target that we're contending with. All the other stuff, right, should stay the same. Physics, immobile, impermeable. I guess maybe you could argue maybe the name could change, whatever, it's a target. The fill color, we start with yellow, is draggable, is false, and all of them are getting added to the scene. So none of that stuff changes, right? The only thing that changes here is the position, because now we're feeding in a whole array of them. Okay, and Jonathan, you have a question. What's your question, sir?
Yes, I think, can you hear me for one? Okay, cool. Making sure this is working. Can you scroll up to the top? I missed something where we added something very to the top for targets, because I'm getting an error saying that cannot find targets in scope. And there we go. Yeah, the variable for targets.
And my speculation would be that you're missing the S.
Let's see. So that could be.
Yeah, and now that I'm looking at these, you know, these target points, that's actually defining the shape of the polygon, right? So it's like, it's a 10 pixel object. So that makes total sense. Yeah, so this is the part we added. And you know what the next instructions are, right? That you come up here, and these two that pre-existed, those are going away. Isn't that interesting? So I'm getting like a spam call in Zoom while I'm teaching. That really shouldn't happen, honestly.
No, it shouldn't.
No. All right, so these two will now be deleted, right? And if you're not comfortable with like straight up deleting, you could just comment them out. All right, so I'm gonna highlight and delete and tighten up my code a little bit.
Okay, I'm all caught up now.
Excellent. So
Thank you for that.
Variable targets. Yeah, and that's not a problem at all. I mean, it's really easy to miss stuff as we're kind of moving. Here's the change to set up target, which is now called add target. Notice the point creation is internal, and we will have a whole array of target points, right? Anytime we feed one in. And then we need to make a couple of changes though. So we have to go back down to the setup function. So notice here, once again, we have the same issue. We need to send a parameter in right? So we're gonna add, we're experimenting here, by the way. We're gonna add a target at the same point that we were using before. So a point X, Y, and I think the position, okay, well, the book is suggesting 150 and 400. So you can go with that, right? So this is gonna add 1 point at that spot. And you know what? Now let's try it. That's the aspect of this that comes next. So here comes the run. Here's the build, right? So now you see I have both my barriers in there. The target is, well, wherever they put it. I'm dropping the ball, and now I'm not hitting it. Okay, so here comes the fun in the game, right? So bounce. Okay, now we hit it. Oh, that was kind of interesting when it hit the corner, right? Yeah, very interesting, actually. Right. So now I'm amusing myself with a silly game that we've created, but you know what? This is kind of where inspiration comes from, you guys, is just having something goofy. And of course, what I'm trying to do is make it hit the corner of the barrier so it bounces weird. Yeah, there you go.
I'm actually getting a bit of an error.
Okay.
I tried changing the angle to a negative double, and it's still mirroring the angle of the first barrier.
Okay, that would tell me that somewhere you're fighting yourself with the code. So like, do you have different XY points for that barrier?
Yes.
Okay. Did you remove up at the top the previous barrier declarations up here? Like we just removed targets. That might be where you want to check. And you know what, Jonathan, we can pause here and just take a really quick look. Why don't
Sure.
we were having a couple little issues, but we did figure them out, right? And one of them was a function call issue. So whatever you have in your setup function, which is the one that steers everything, that's got to match, you know, your functions above. So when we refactored, it should have taken care of it, but if it doesn't, then you'll get a little out of scope message. The other thing to make sure of is, you know, now that we're sending in values to these functions, and that's both for add barrier and add target, that anything that we had hard coded before, and I'm just looking at, okay, at the barrier, that was the one, right? So if you have something hard coded here or here, then all of them are going to be the same. The whole point of these is that we read the position and the angle in externally, and then we can apply it selectively. All right, let's move on to the next part of this. And really what happens here, and I'm going to read this right from the book, is we're at the point where now we want to create a bunch of targets and a bunch of barriers to make it a little more interesting. Now, how many barriers you have, I think that's pretty subjective. You know, the book is using 3 barriers and 5 targets. All right. So let me just read this from right what they say. So now it says construct the challenge. So we're on page 428 in the instructor book, and it says you're finally ready to create the challenge with multiple barriers and targets. To start, add a few more targets and barriers in your setup function by calling the add target and add barrier several times with different arguments. And by the way, right, we won't know exactly where the stuff ends up until we try stuff. You could just type in the ones that I type. If you wish, you know, that's absolutely fine. And then, or just come up with your own numbers, that's fine too. It's really kind of up to you. It says, and this is kind of interesting, an approach. To comment out the target is draggable equals false line and add target so that you can move the targets around again. So there's a little strategy here. So let's do that. So let's find the add target. And what they're asking us to do is to take this line, which basically does not allow you to move those targets and comment it out. So the strategy here is basically this. We're going to comment it out right now. And then while the app is running, move the targets around and let this little panel down here that shows us the XY positions show us where we've moved them to. And then we'll just copy those points, right? All right, so it says, build and run your app, then build your solved challenges. Follow. Position the barriers so the ball bounces in a fun way from one to the other before falling off the screen. Note final positions are printed to the console, whatever. Watch the path of the ball and position the targets along the way so it touches each one. Note their final positions as well. Use the final positions of the targets and barriers to modify the code in setup. And then don't forget to comment that when you're all done, right? So like, in other words, don't forget to come back here and uncomment this, right? Because you don't want them messing with what you want. Now, the kind of the goal of this really is that you should add a bunch of points. All right, so they have some points that they've added. I've added one. Let's add one barrier. Let's do this manually first, and then we'll add a bunch of targets. So I'm going to add another barrier. So add barrier at point XY, and that XY will be, oh gosh, I'm looking at one that's, okay, so they have one here that's 325 and 150. The width is 30, so it's really small. The height is only 15. Now that's kind of interesting. I wasn't really changing the heights on my other ones. And then the angle, oops, sorry, the angle on this, I'm trying to tab key, I keep hitting whatchamacallit. So they have one on an angle, and then they have one at 0.03, which is pretty flat. All right, so I'll just go with those for now, and then we can always change those, right? It doesn't like the way I typed the number in, so 0.03. And then we want to add some targets. So I have one at this position. And you know what? I don't know if I can copy paste from here. I don't think so. I'm going to have to type these manually. So at point XY, and then I'm just typing in numbers. I'm copying what's in the book, by the way, somewhat. And if you're wondering, can I just make up my own numbers? Sure, you absolutely can. I'm using ones that are in the book on purpose, because they say it creates an interesting challenge. And you see, it becomes a little bit of a mechanical process after a while, right? So, all right, so there is 5 targets. It's pretty much what the book has. One of them is different, but whatever. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I want to see how they sit on the screen. So let's give this a run. And here comes the sim. Right. See all those different targets on the screen, and you see my barriers, right? And like, where do you set the thing to bounce to hit those? I'm not really sure. That's a really good question. All right, so if you only have 3 barriers, something like this work? I really don't know. Let's just try it. All right, well, that was horribly unsuccessful. Right, so you can see what the challenge is here, right? And this is kind of what makes it fun. Now, the other part is we can move these around, right? So every time you move something, you can say, well, I don't like, you know, that's not a good spot for that, and that's not a good spot for that. So like this one that I'm moving was the topmost one. So that one's changed to 317, 187. This is the topmost one. So I'm gonna change it. 317 and oops, 187. All right, I'm gonna stop it from running, run it again, and see if my target's moved. All right. The whole point of this is that you can have like different spots for this stuff. Like if my barriers are way down there, I'm never gonna hit those targets, right? If they're here, well, I might hit some of the targets, right? But I'm thinking like these top targets, or like maybe this bottom one should be maybe in the middle somewhere. This one should maybe be, I don't know, here somewhere, you know, and I just can capture those. Now, I'm not sure which ones I just moved, but you know what? You could potentially, you know, just move all of them a little bit. This is just kind of a strategy. So I'm moving all 5 targets just a little bit, and then all those numbers are here. So the last 5 maneuvers are captured. I just have to transfer those last 5 into my code. So I'm just going to do that. So let's just, this is kind of goofy, but I'm using the app to help me write my app. Right. If you feel where I'm going with this. So now I'm going to run it again. I'm going to stop it and run it. And now those targets should be kind of where I put them. All right, kind of. All right. The barriers need to be moved, right? So if I just leave them where they're at, I hit 2 of them. That's not great, right? So now you have to kind of figure things out. Now, of course, you can also add more barriers. This is like a horribly terrible setup here. Right. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not really sure what the best answer is here. Interesting. Certainly not getting this one over here though, right? There we go. There's a no-win scenario. Right. And here's the worst part. I can't move the barriers. I can move my targets, right? Seems like I'm always having a problem hitting that one. Yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna move 2 of these. Now, of course, you can always add more targets or more barriers, right? So maybe that's a trick. All right, I'm gonna stop this, and just for the sake of it, I'm gonna add 1 more barrier. And we'll choose an XY. I don't know what it should be. Maybe pretty high up. Let's put it at like 80X and 50Y. And we'll make it kind of a small one again. So the width will be, we'll do like another small thin one, but we'll give it a reverse angle that's very slight, like 0.8, and actually that would be a negative, right? Let's run this again. All right, so now I got all these barriers to play with. And so maybe I can go like this. Big one can come over here. And then we can maybe get lucky and get the little ones like that. All right. All right, that's an epic fail too. But this is kind of the fun of it. Yeah. So now the tweaks, we are in essence done here, right? But the tweaks, are really kind of up to you. So in other words, like where you put the barriers, where you put the targets, you can just play with that to your heart's content. You can make, I'm going to say probably bigger barriers are better, generally speaking. I think these small ones are kind of like not awesome. And so like one suggestion I would make is probably make them all the same height. I'm thinking that would be good. And then maybe make these a little bit wider. And then, I don't know, maybe make this one a little smaller. All right. Let's stop and run one more time. And then you can start figuring out where you're going to put stuff. And I'm not really sure what makes a lot of sense here. I think my target placement is just horrible, basically. Something like that is my guess. Not too bad. Oh, all right. Well, could have been better, I guess, but you can also change your angle. Maybe if I change the angle on the first one, I could change it to like point, I don't know, 16 or something. Let's run it again. All right, so that one's a little steeper. Of course, I lost all my positions, but maybe, just maybe, this will work. And maybe this one will go this way. Oh, not too bad. Could be better. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like I'm going to hit these ones over here, am I? Not
Nope.
with this setup. All right, let's try something different. All right, so you should definitely, I mean, what I think is fascinating. Oh, there you go. Almost got all of them. Pretty fascinating though, little situation. These are still draggable though. Like, so if you don't like where the stuff is sitting, you can just kind of move it. Record the position. So I just changed two of them. I'm not sure which two they are, but you could simply update these numbers here and go with it. All right. So that part of it's done. We're moving on to part 9 now. So you think we're just about done, but actually we're not. We still have the last part, okay, which is keeping score. And it says here, the game functions well as it is, but the only feedback to the user is when the target turns green. Wouldn't it be nice if the app would detect when the user has hit all the targets and communicate the good news to the user? And that's pretty easy to do using a little bit of extra code in the ball exited scene function. So let's go find that. So ball exited scene. So here it is, right? And what we're going to do now is we're going to add a little bit of extra code in here to kind of keep track of things. All right. Now, the one thing that you might want to do, and I just want to remind you, is you can uncomment the is draggable thing here, but you might want to put a little thing in here, comment out to move the targets. Just so you know, this is the one that you can comment out to move the targets. For right now, I'm going to leave mine where they're at. Okay, but we want to put our attention here now. So once the ball has exited the scene, we do want the barriers to be draggable, right? That's important. But now let's set up a variable here, and this variable will be called hit targets. We're going to set this to 0, by the way. I'm going to leave a little space in here. Right. Now we're going to say for each target in targets, and you see it tried to auto type it for me. I should have just pressed enter, honestly. All right, so for each target in the targets, we're going to do a little thing here. If the target dot fill color is equivalent to green, right, which means they hit it. So if that's true, then we're going to have that variable we just created, hit targets. We're going to plus equals 1 to it. We're going to add a point for each time a target is hit. So you guys catch what I'm doing here. We're going to keep score. All right. So then we'll set up a separate thing here. We'll say if hit targets equals the count of all the targets. We'll say targets.count. Then we're going to output a message that says print one. So variable to keep score, go through each target. If we see that it is green, we'll add 1 to the point total. And then if the targets.count is equivalent to the number of targets hit, right? So if we have 5 targets, all of them were hit, then we're going to put a little message saying, you won, right? Now, the other thing that happens is every time you drop the ball, and you maybe even think about this, if you had already hit the target, it's already changed from yellow to green, but we want to reset it, right? So we need to have another thing in here to say for target and targets, we want to set the target fill color back to yellow. Right, so every time they drop the ball all the way through, we're going to reset it, right? Because how do we know if they're, good or not? I'm going to try to adjust at least one of my X's here, or one of my targets, like maybe this one, which I think is maybe the topmost one. And I'm just looking at like their settings here. Maybe I'm just going to tweak a couple of these basically. And maybe this one will go to like 323. It's adjusting a couple. I think this is good. And maybe I'll tweak this angle to be a little sharper. And this one to be a little sharper too. Maybe I don't know, we'll just take it back to 0.1. How about that? I think that's pretty good. So let's go ahead and run this again. I'm hoping this time maybe I can set myself up to win. I don't like where the barriers are coming in, so I think that those all have to change. But I think the point is, move the barriers to where you need them. So maybe if I start with something simple like this, and then maybe it can bounce here. I'm not sure what the winning scenario is here, but let's just try it. Okay. Okay, we're getting there. Interesting for sure. Try a completely different approach. Right, since you can move them, right? Nobody says you
Yeah.
can't set yourself up to win. That would be kind of the hope. I don't know. It seems like that extra barrier. Oh, there we go. Yay. If you notice, now that I got them all, I won the game. See that in the console?
Hmm.
All right. So I won the game. Yay. All right. Now we're not seeing, by the way, and you could do this too. You could also print. Actually, we can do this either way. We could add a little print command here, and this is just a console trick, by the way. So we could just output hit targets every time it hits. So let's I'm going to stop it, run it again. So now every time I hit a target, it should also count down here. Now, of course, I should be able to hit a whole bunch just by dropping the ball. There's 3. See, 1, 2, 3. All right. And then, of course, if you want to try to actually make it win, let's see if we can do that. Nope, not successful.
Just a heads up, I'm getting an error. I don't know if I missed a step.
Maybe. I think it's interesting that it just has so much sideways momentum here. That it just feels compelled to go off the screen. Fascinating. But you do see that it is keeping score, whether or not I'm winning or not. I should have kept my winning scenario up on the screen. This is a horrible disaster. That one really weird one there is the one that's getting me here. Now I'm obsessed with winning, right? I can't move that one over to make it automatically comply. All right, this is really bad. Because now I'm obsessed. I just wanted to get a win, basically. All right. So that's the case in the point, right? So we got that working. Now, right. Now, here's the other problem, right? So we can print stuff to the console all day long. And here's kind of the takeaway, because when you first learn how to code, you all put to the console, right? And then you create a GUI program that the user can't see the console, right? So we need to put a message on the screen, and it says, technically you accomplish your goal, but the user will never see the console. You should display a message so they'll get a little jolt of satisfaction when they win. There's a method in shape scene named present alert. Modify your code in the ball exited scene, replacing the print statement with the following line, right? So instead of print one game, what we can do is put a message right here that says scene dot present alert, the words you want. You one would probably be a good one. And then when the alert is complete, the alert is dismissed. I thought that would autofill, but you have to type this one out. Dismissed. I gotta spell it right though. let's see, I'm failing on all accounts here. Just trying to type it correctly. Alert dismissed. There we go. All right. So now what this is basically the reason it wasn't autofilling is because this is basically a dummy call to something that doesn't exist. And you'll notice that you'll get this little error box here that if you read it, it says cannot find alert dismissed in scope. And so we can basically create an empty alert function, and we're going to do that right here. So we're just going to create a func, and this basically just absorbs the action is really kind of a way to think of it. It just allows it to happen on the screen. Nothing is called within there, but notice how it takes the error message away. All right. Now, they're making a point here in the book, and it says you've just completed another example of a callback. This time, rather than setting the value of a property, you passed a function into another function as an argument. And that feels and is a little meta. The present alert text completion thing calls another function once the alert has been dismissed. For example, you could use that callback to continue to the next level. If you had it like some other, you could call the next level of the game. In that case, you don't need to do anything after it's dismissed, which is why you create an empty function. But if they won, we could have a little command here. It says next level, and then we'd move on to the next level. Kind of interesting, right? So if you feel it like, you know, the enthusiasm to go ahead and build the next level, you could totally do that. And it would be a whole new scene, by the way. Now it does say if you option click the method name, you'll see something familiar in the completion parameter. So if you, they're saying if you option click this, right, and you'll see this this little tidbit right here. And so in other words, it's saying like once you're complete, what does it do? So what, when you complete this function, what is the next function you're triggering is really the whole thing. And they call this escaping. So like, how are you getting out, right? And so this is just indicating the callback basically. This sort of thing is kind of common actually when you're writing you know, GUI programs like this. If you want like this could go away, yeah, but you can always I mean, they never see it, so you could keep this, but I'm going to comment it out. That's not really necessary. All right. Now, if you also wanted, you could keep the print command in the console. You know, that's on you, right? Let's go ahead and run this. And let's see if we can get it to win. Right. And so I'm going to try to be careful here to see if I can make that happen with the least number of drags. Right. There we go. Woohoo! Right. So I won, and you get the little thing. When I click OK, nothing happens. Right. But could you imagine if we clicked OK and then we have a new set of targets, new barriers, and you're on level 2, right? You win that one, and then you could, I mean, think about it. You could just add challenges. You could put like graphics in here. You could maybe have animals that fly across and interrupt the ball dropping. You know, I mean, all sorts of like goofy little things. Right. All right. So that's completing then the Bouncy Ball app. That's it, folks. All right. And I'm going to stop the recording here, and we are going to take a break.